The premier event for infection prevention and control is coming to San Antonio this June. APIC's annual conference brings you the latest research, innovative products, and practical knowledge to help you prevent infection. From inspiring keynotes to thought-provoking panel discussions, APIC 24 curates an extraordinary platform for knowledge exchange. Meet IPs from around the world who face the same daily challenges as you. If you work in infection prevention and control, you don't want to miss this event. Learn more and register to join us, in person or virtually, at annual.apic.org.
You're listening to the 5-Second Rule, brought to you by APIC, the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology. Together with our nearly 16,000 members, we strive to create a safer world through the prevention of infection. Join us while we talk to infection preventionists and other experts to learn the truth about some common myths related to the risk of infection and to get tips to keep yourself and the people around you safe from infection.
Welcome to the 5-Second Rule. We are the new co-hosts. My name is Lerenza Howard, and my preferred pronouns is she, her.
Hi, and I'm Kelly Holmes, and my preferred pronouns are also she, her. We're so excited to be here today and hope you are too.
So today is, of course, a special episode because this is our first episode, Kelly and I, but we are also interviewing our first ever guest, which is such an amazing individual, the new APIC President, Pat Jackson. But before we get to Pat's interview, I did want to ask you, Kelly, so how was your New Year's?
It was great. Can't complain. How was yours?
It was great. I'm really, really looking forward to the year ahead. So, curiosity, what are your New Year's resolutions? Do you have any big things that you want to achieve?
You know, I'm not huge on making radical New Year's resolutions because I think sometimes they're made to be broken. But one thing I do strive for, I think, is self-care. Really want to focus on that this year. I think that when life gets busy and things get busy, that's usually the first thing that falls off my plate. So I'm going to really focus on being more aware of that. What about you, Lerenza?
I think that we are similar in that regard. I'm not really an individual that sets out for New Year's resolutions because, as you've noted, I feel as though that's only setting me up for failure. But definitely, especially post-COVID world as an IP, just a busy working mom, just shelling out more time for myself. I think that's definitely something that I need to place at the forefront and, just continuing on with career goals and being the best IP that I can be, I suppose.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I love picking people's brains about what their idea of self-care looks like. So, what is one thing you do to take care of yourself?
You know what? I am trying to listen to more calming apps or things such as that to try to focus, because one of the barriers that I have with so much technology is that it's difficult to focus on one thing. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the saying that, when you're really multitasking, are you really achieving those goals that you need to set out to achieve within a timely manner? You're focusing on so much, but what are you really achieving? I really, really struggle with that. And even I think in my mind with having dual screens or triple screens, some of us at work, it's so difficult to focus on just one task because, of course, you're working on 3 or 4 different things at one time. So I know I need to do better, and I need to definitely spend more time on focusing on how best I manage that. So what does self-care look like to you, Kelly?
Oh gosh, Lorenza, that was such a good answer. I was thinking like painting my toenails. Um, no, no, yours is really good. And I feel that same way too. Like, setting my phone down when I'm in an Uber, for example, and looking out the window instead. Yeah, focusing on one thing at a time, I think is really good. I've been practicing meditation for several years now. I do a guided app for that. And so I just really want to, continue doing that because I do think that helps calm me down and bring me into the present moment for myself and my kids and my coworkers and things like that. But yeah, painting my toenails plus, the other stuff.
Thank you. And I'll reach out to you later on tips on meditation to quiet my mind. So, seeing as though our listeners now know about our New Year's resolutions, or at least lack thereof, as far as us planning for living a better, much more healthier life, I believe it's time for us to share a little bit more about ourselves as the new co-hosts. So now that we're in this new role as a podcaster, right? I am new to this. So we are, what about you? What about you, Kelly? Do you have podcasting experience?
No, I do not. I am also a rookie.
So this is so amazing. We are going to learn together and definitely develop our podcasting skills. But I would imagine that we both have public speaking skills, though, to make us comfortable in wanting to even pursue this role as a co-host of APIC's 5-second rule. So with that being said, what are some of the scariest stories that you have to tell the listeners regarding a public speaking incident? Like, have you ever had a situation whereby you froze? Tell us a story, a scary story.
Oh, let me name the ways. But I guess in the post-COVID world, when Teams and Zoom became kind of the norm for meetings, I happened to be on a Zoom call, and I thought that I was muted. And it was around Easter, I believe. And there was a horrible smell coming from my chimney. And I had spent like the better part of the morning, like calling all of these people, like, I don't know what's going on. Finally found this person to come out. And of course he came like right when the meeting started. And he came in and he was looking at the chimney, and then he goes walking out and he comes back in with a bucket. And I was like, well, what's the bucket for? And he was like, oh, there's a dead squirrel in your chimney. And so I just started hyperventilating, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I got a text message from another person on the call, Kelly, you're not on mute. And of course it was, hospital administrators and physicians and IPs. And so my face was bright red. It was humbling for sure. What about you, Lerenza? Do you have any good ones?
Yes, definitely. But I will piggyback off of your story. That is one of my greatest fears, which is why I see, and why in the post-COVID world, now that everything is virtual, I'm always checking the microphone just to make sure that I'm on mute. But it wasn't anything in infection prevention. I was in an interview, and it wasn't for a job or anything such as that. But I was being asked questions. It was panel style. And this was many years ago, prior to what I define as my voice. It was prior to me finding my voice. And I was just rambling. The questions that they asked, I knew that I wasn't readily asking the question fully, or even, to the extent in which they were asking, but I was so nervous, literally shaking, that I was just rambling. And if I will say that was the worst experience or scariest experience, it was indeed that.
We are our own worst enemies,
Yes.
We're trying to be perfect. We put all this pressure on ourselves, but perfect is boring. Got to embrace the dead squirrel stories and the rambling stories, and we learn and get through it.
I think that is a hashtag for us, squirrel stories.
Hashtag dead squirrel.
So in addition to that, what podcast are you listening to? What is interesting to you in the podcast world? Aside from the 5-second rule podcast.
Oh, yes, of course. I love the 5-second rule and I love APIC. I think it's a nice condensed message of a long article. So I think that that's a great way to kind of get the science on the go. And then I also like to listen to like the self-help, self-improvement stuff versus reading it. I just tend to absorb it better. So I do like to listen to Brene Brown. I love her. She has multiple podcasts. The one I'm listening to right now is Unlocking Us. She always has some tidbit of fantastic ism. Dan Harris, he does the 10% Happier meditation app that I listen to. So then he also has a podcast, which is also interesting. And then I listen to something called the Morning Microdose, which is like a snippet of a larger podcast, a little ways to start your morning. But what about you? What do you like to listen to?
Yeah, so I will say that one of the interesting, of course, I will add both APIC 5-second rule podcasts just to bolster my knowledge as an IP, but one of them is Beyond Clean, which is a podcast that, centers around SPD. So as a newer IP, which is what I am, I only have 2 years of experience. I try to find supplementary sources of information wherever I can find it. In addition to that, the Public Health Epidemiology Conversation podcast is absolutely a great podcast, in my opinion, for public health professionals. And in addition, Earn Your Leisure, which is a financial literacy podcast. So those are mine.
I love that. Ooh, I'm taking notes. I love that. I'm going to check those out.
Oh, yes, definitely. So, Kelly, I admire you for your IP experience. So how did you get your start in IP, and what was your first job like?
Well, I came into the role, I was getting my master's in epidemiology, and I had watched the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, like in high school. And I was sitting there like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be when I grow up. And so then I had a college professor that was like, well, you need to go into epidemiology. And I was like, I don't think you're right. I don't think that's what that is, but she was right. And so, I was very interested in infection prevention in the hospital setting, but I did think that you had to be a nurse to break into that role. But then I met a company in Houston where they were very interested in hiring people with a public health background into the role and then supplementing that education with the clinical background and then all the other things that we need to know as infection preventionists. So I'm lucky to say that I've worked for the same company for almost 20 years. My first experience in infection prevention is my current, I'm with the same company. Through that company, I've had a lot of different roles. So I've gotten to work in the long-term acute care setting, the inpatient rehab setting, and the acute care setting. I've also done different types of consulting with health departments and larger systems around the country. So I've definitely really been blessed with lots of opportunities to keep it interesting and to keep growing and learning. So what about you? You said that you're newer to the role. So tell me, how did you transition into infection prevention?
Absolutely. So my background is in microbiology. I've actually worked in a food laboratory, in a radioactive pharmaceutical laboratory. Then I transitioned into clinical working as a med tech. And when I was onboarded to one of the institutions here in Chicago for my first med tech role, I first encountered an infection preventionist that was providing onboarding, hand hygiene, and of course, all things infection prevention education, including using a glow germ demonstration for all of the new hires. And I was very, very intrigued by that. So of course, with collaborating with infection prevention through that particular role and learning more about their role, I knew in the back of my mind that was something that I would work towards. And then years later, I subsequently attained my master's in healthcare administration. And I knew that at that point in time, after having, several years of experience as a medical technologist, and then I transitioned into immunology as a medical technologist and subsequently began to look for IP roles. And subsequently, I attained a role here at an acute care hospital in Chicago, and I hit the ground running. I started in 2020. So it was, in my opinion, an amazing time as an IP to start my career and at the height of a pandemic. It definitely kept me on my toes. So I learned information it was ever so quickly, because of course at that time the guidance was changing what seemed like every day. And I believe that really set the foundation for me being an IP that can readily acclimate and pivot when necessary. So that is how I subsequently got into infection prevention and my career course into this role. So
I love that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And I appreciate you as the co-host of this, because I know that I, along with our listeners, are going to learn a ton of information based on your knowledge. So I appreciate you.
Oh, Lerenza, thank you. I appreciate you too. Your energy that you bring and your perspective are wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. And to our listeners, to learn more about myself and Kelly, we've actually completed an interview, which will be published within the winter issue of The Prevention Strategist. And this will be available on apic.org on the website. And if you want to learn more about us, please review our interview on pages 26 and 27.
And next, we're going to move into the meat and potatoes of our show, where we get to talk to the new APIC president, Pat Jackson. We are so lucky to have Pat here with us today and can't wait to hear from her.
Pat Jackson is the 2023 president of APIC. She is director of infection prevention at White Rock Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. She has been an infection preventionist for the past 27 years. She has worked primarily in large academic medical centers, predominantly in pediatrics, but recently has become a one-er, or a lone IP, in a small community hospital in Dallas, Texas. Pat's passion is mentoring new IPs. She served as an original author on APIC's Roadmap for the Novice Infection Preventionist and spent many years as a faculty member to APIC's epidemiology training courses. She believes we have to attract and retain the talent of the next generation in order for APIC to succeed. So, Pat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and greetings from Dallas. Kelly and Lerenza, I've never done a podcast before, so I'm honored to be your first guest as you take on this new role.
Oh, thank you, Pat. We are honored to have you with us. Congratulations on this new role. It's so exciting. And, I'm very curious. I have a million questions for you. But, how did you get to this point? How did you get to the 2023 APIC president?
I started as an IP in 1994, and anybody my age that's an infection preventionist usually found IP the same way. They just fell into it. So I fell into IP because I was filling in for an infection preventionist who we were called infection control nurses almost solely then in the olden days, who was going to be out for a while. She decided not to come in, and then I, fell in love with it at that point. I really first started getting involved in my local Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. I attended meetings, I started volunteering for committees, and then I ran for offices there. I also then got involved in the national APIC organization. I served on some committees like public policy and education. Then, ran for the board. I was the treasurer, and now here I am with such a great opportunity to be the president.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I think it's so good for IPs to hear about getting involved in their local APIC chapter and the opportunities the doors that will open. So also, I'm super curious, what are you looking forward to this year as the APIC president?
Kelly, I'm just so honored to be the president. I'm really looking forward to advancing the platform of APIC's strategic initiatives. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pike, but I'm also excited about sharing some new perspectives I've gained as a sole IP at a small community hospital. You heard Lerenza call it a oner. I've dubbed myself a oner since I am a department of one. I've been practicing for a long time, and most of that time in large academic medical centers. In April of this year, I made a transition to this small community hospital. I can literally drive out of my garage in the morning and be sitting at my desk in 9 minutes. It's
that's fantastic.
The greatest. But I'm not the only oner out there. According to a recent APIC membership survey, about 37% of our members are the only IP in their departments. So that means 1 in 3 members is a sole or a oner. Many of these sole IPs, though, are part of bigger systems, but about 16% of those are truly on their own. And I really want to spend part of my year as APIC president really advocating for the oner and talking about the strengths that the oner has to bring to APIC.
I love that. And then you've had that great experience at the larger system facilities and then moving into that lone IP position. What kind of resources are out there for that lone IP?
Yeah, that definitely is a challenge. There was a big contrast for me from coming from a big institution to a smaller one. And the oner's really have limited resources. I was used to having anything I wanted, any resource I wanted, whether, it costs money or not, any new product that I thought would help, decrease infections, I could get in. At my small community hospital, that's not the same. I literally have to make and laminate my isolation signs. I was talking to my good friend Marie Wilson the other day. She practices in Washington, and she was telling me there's a single set of isolation signs that the state of Washington uses. And I thought, man, I wish Texas would adopt that. It would save a lot of people a lot of time.
That is a very good point. I cannot believe that you're, making your own isolation signs.
Yeah, another thing that I think is hard for the lone IP, especially if you are a new novice infection preventionist, is to have access to mentors. When early in my career, I had people that were my mentors. One of my earliest mentors was Patty Grant, who was actually an APIC president or an APIC past president. And those people kind of brought me along. They saw potential in me. And I think this is actually a place where local chapters can help, bigger hospitals can help. A lot of our local chapters already have mentoring programs. So I would encourage any of the lone IPs or the oner's to, one, get involved with your local chapter, see if they have a mentoring group and get yourself a mentor. And even if they don't have a formal mentoring group, if you've met someone that you like and that you respect, ask them if they'll be a mentor to you. Now, mentoring is super fun for me. It really gives me energy, and I love to do it. And I know there's a lot of other people around there also that would love to be mentors. So find yourself a good mentor is another piece of advice I have for the lone IP.
Oh, I think you make a very good point there, Pat. And then if you do go to your local APIC chapter and they don't have the mentoring program, just keep reaching out and building those relationships. That's a very good point to make. And then Lerenza, do you have experience as a lone IP?
So I will say I never was a lone IP, but one word that I will create today is a tour. So I started my career in infection prevention as one of 2 infection preventionists working for an acute care hospital. And I definitely can relate to this subject because although I wasn't a oner, we were both new to the profession. So it's very different and or difficult. It poses its challenges only having 2 individuals for a department that is very integral to the organization and the barriers that you experience. And I think this conversation is very important because we really truly realize that many of us, or most of us, are all experiencing the same barriers or issues. And, it makes your world much more smaller when you're able to have resources. And as Pat was noting, reach out to a mentor, really attain someone or reach out to someone that can provide you with some level of knowledge. If there are additional resources that are needed outside of your organization, you need to have someone that you can readily, call to provide you with their experience as an infection preventionist. But I will say, me personally, one of the barriers that I experience as an infection preventionist and a new infection preventionist working as a tour, is that individuals don't readily know what your role entails. They don't understand where the line is drawn as far as what resources you provide to the facility. So say, for example, we all know that we've been thrusted into the COVID-19 pandemic. It is an infectious disease, but is it solely the responsibility of an infection preventionist, of one or two individuals, of an acute care hospital? I think that the thought process needs to change regarding that. Is, of course, infection prevention is all of our responsibilities as healthcare professionals. So definitely I've experienced how it's useful having stakeholders that understand that we can't do it all, and that we definitely need their partnership to implement infection control practices.
Yeah, you just reminded me when you were talking about that COVID is, and the whole pandemic, it's not infection prevention's responsibility completely, to do everything. I think going back to knowing your resources, I talked about, there's resources that cost money that I used to be able to get whenever I wanted, but there's really a lot of resources out there that don't cost money, and knowing where those are would be really important for the lone IP or the oner. There's certainly lots of resources at your local and state health department. The CDC has a lot of resources. Yeah, this is, though, APIC's 5-second rule, and APIC has great resources. There's actually a tremendous resource that APIC developed solely for the lone IP or the oner. It's a toolkit, and it's called You're Not Alone: Practical Tips and Strategies for the Isolated Infection Preventionist. It's a great document, and it actually has a section that's called Decide When to Lead, Consult, or Refer. So this is a great resource, and I would encourage all of our lone IP oners to look this up.
Oh, that's great, Pat.
They can go to the APIC website, and it will be right there. It's one of APIC's toolkits. So if you just go to apic.org, you can find it right there.
Perfect. One of my experiences as a lone IP, or even in a group, is that everything becomes an infection control issue. Everybody from different departments is coming to you with requests. Can you look up this? Can you do that? Can you develop this? Can you help us with that? So do you have any advice for us, Pat, on developing those boundaries and what kind of that scope of practice should look like?
The great thing about a small hospital is that you're more like a family, and you tend to know everyone. So I think it's important for the success of the lone IP is to really develop some key relationships with key medical staff, key clinical staff, key ancillary staff, and to really come alongside them to be an influencer, not to be someone to tell them what to do. And as you develop these key relationships, you're educating these people. And I think if we can educate people well, we're going to see less questions. And like I said, this APIC toolkit has a great section on trying to help you prioritize what is something that I should do myself, and what is something that somebody else can do, and maybe I just help them through it. So I think that developing those key relationships, know who the power players are, know who are the people that are loved, and so you can get things done easier. That's actually another thing that's a lot easier and an advantage to being a lone IP at a smaller hospital, is that you can get things done so much faster. When I was at a large academic medical center, I would have to go through 29 committees to get one change to the isolation policy. When I'm at this small community hospital, I can say, I think we need to change this. I take it to one committee and it's done. So that's a great thing about being a lone IP, that there's less bureaucracy to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's a very valid point. That is a very valid point. And I love your point on developing the relationships and really figuring out who those key players are. It is going to look different in a large academic medical center versus the smaller community hospitals, but walking in with, thinking of, beginning with the end in mind. What do you want to accomplish and how are you going to accomplish that, and getting those players at the table to help you? That's great advice.
I definitely agree, Kelly. It's definitely pertinent to ascertain who those stakeholders are. But also what I found in my experience is that having the tools and the knowledge needed in order to promote synergistic relationships such that you can gain buy-in from those stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think another thing that helps the one-er to be successful is to really seek out leadership positions and be an influencer. Let people see that you are a leader. I think sometimes IPs at smaller hospitals tend to think they have, one certain job and they do that one certain job. But IPs are so well-rounded, especially an IP at a small institution. They're master of everything. So they're really more well-rounded. They have a broader set of skills compared to often IPs at larger hospitals. Are compartmentalized. There might be somebody that does HLD. There might be somebody that does surveillance, where the strength of the lone IP is that they are a master of everything. So really, the experienced lone IP has a lot to offer to those novice IPs at the larger institution because they know a lot.
That is
Pat,
true.
What about those lone IPs? They are the masters of everything. They do possess the knowledge, but maybe their personality isn't someone such that they would readily pursue a leadership role. What advice would you provide to them? They're meek and humble. Maybe they're not someone who asserts themselves.
Right. I would say just start small. Don't start, you don't have to start out being the head of a huge committee, but just start by volunteering for little things. And they might be a little bit out of your comfort zone, but volunteer anyway. You'll get help to do it, I'm sure, from other people. So just to in a step-by-step fashion, maybe volunteer and ask to take on larger and larger things, but start out small, get some confidence. I've been doing this for a long time. So, a lot of things don't scare me anymore, but I certainly remember being a novice IP and being scared to death to volunteer for everything. So I think just start out small. When you're in a committee situation and they say, I need someone to do X, volunteer to do X.
I love that, Pat. That is a great tip, especially for that new IP that doesn't have the confidence yet. Getting out there, talking, getting out of your office, knowing the nurses at the bedside as well as the C-suite, and build those relationships. That's great advice. So for our listeners today, what do you want them to take away? What do you want them to hear from this conversation?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that I want the lone IP or the one-er to realize is that they should not see themselves as lesser or less experienced or as their colleagues that might work in larger institutions, that the lone IP does have unique strengths and that the IP from a larger institution can actually learn from them. Like I just said before, volunteer for leadership roles, get involved in your local chapter, serve on a committee, volunteer to do something at the national level.
I love that. I think that is great advice for our listeners to walk away with.
So, Pat, keeping in line with tradition, we always ask our guests 2 questions. So the first is, what have you learned about yourself over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I love that question, Lerenza. I think that the pandemic changed us all. And I think I learned the importance of making sure that you have a group of people that can relate to you, that can relate to the experience that you're in, that can help you de-stress when you need it. I was part of a group of IPs that had, this text message thing going on, and we would check in regularly with each other. When someone was super stressed, all they might have to say is, "I'm so stressed." And all of a sudden, supportive messages coming. It really was a nice thing. And I think I learned to not underestimate the importance of psychological and mental well-being, and that we can't do it alone. And that's actually the beauty of an organization like this. We're not doing it alone. We have APIC that brings us all together for, a common goal.
Oh, I love that, Pat. That's perfect. And then tell us, for the second question, what are you looking forward to in infection prevention?
Yeah, I am really looking forward to less focus on the pandemic. The pandemic's not over. I acknowledge that. But less focus on the pandemic and more focus on other ways to fulfill APIC's mission, which is a safer world through infection prevention.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Yes, I am ready to move on from this pandemic. I agree. We will never forget. Yes, but it will be nice to focus on improving patient care in a more stable non-outbreak setting. Yes.
Absolutely. So, Pat, before we close and before we let you go today, we actually have a message for the outgoing APIC President, Linda Dickey.
Hey, Pat, it's Linda Dickey sending you a message of encouragement and support as you move into your 2023 year as our president of APIC. I just want to thank you so much for your leadership, and the future holds such tremendous promise and potential. And the work that we have underway to strengthen and grow our workforce and create and expand our research efforts, and also to develop mutually beneficial partnerships and coalitions. All of that work will poise us for amazing future and current success. And you're going to be right at the center of that, along with Devin, our amazing CEO. I also know that, I believe you specifically will inspire our current IPs as well as our next generation. You are such an experienced and wise practitioner and leader. And I believe that we will all benefit from your wisdom and from your example. We are here to support you as well as each other. And I just want you to know that we are so tremendously fortunate to have you represent us nationally and internationally. So have a great 2023. We're looking forward to your leadership, and enjoy your year, Pat. Take care.
Oh my gosh, that was so wonderful. Linda is the perfect example of what I keep trying to say is get a mentor. Linda has been so great at mentoring me up to this point into the presidency. So that was just super nice to hear.
That was a great message, Pat. I echo what she says. Thank you so much for your leadership. And she also mentioned that she believes you're going to inspire current IPs. And I think you already are through this podcast. You certainly have an air of calm about you, which I appreciate, and your expertise that you bring to the table. So we're lucky to have you on this podcast today, and really looking forward to the year ahead.
So it was such a pleasure, Pat, interviewing you today as our first guest. Pat, thank you for your time.
Thank you to both of you. You guys are going to be great.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
New Year.